Hello and welcome to Game Design Hour. I'm your host, Miles Goldsmith. On each episode of Game Design Hour, I sit down and interview a different game developer behind the video games you know and love. On today's episode, I'm interviewing one of the amazing developers over at Coffee Knots about his work on the video game Spacelines from the Far Out. Spacelines from the Far Out is a chaotic party game where you and up to 4 friends run your own space-age alien airline. Let's get into the interview.
My name is Fabio. I'm a creative director and co-founder at the indie studio from São Paulo, Brazil called Coffee Knots. And last June 2022, we just released our first game called Spacelines from the Far Out. It's been quite a ride.
What was the first thing that's really sparked your interest in creating video games?
That's a good question because I kind of started this relatively late. When I started to study making games and programming and game design, I was already at 24. I actually studied it. It was a university level design course, but I had already majored in international relations before. And ever since I was 16 years old until I actually started making games, my job was actually teaching English. I was an English teacher here in São Paulo. So the process is a little bit convoluted, but now looking in retrospect, I can see a clear line that brought me here. There's the obvious stuff, like when I was a kid, I was pretty nerdy and I was, only child. I liked to create my own, games and stuff like that. My father, he had this VHS camera and I liked making a little stop motion movies. I knew that I liked creating things. If anybody ever asked me, what do you want to do when you grow up? I would say, I want to be a movie maker. So then I started working pretty early, teaching English. And I briefly worked in a movie production company just to see if it was interesting. And I did not like it. I didn't really like the people. But then I kept going. And back in 2014, I think, I was like, you know what? I don't want to teach English anymore. I want to fulfill that idea that I want to work with something creatively. And I was teaching English. I was talking to a student of mine. And I said, I was thinking of making movies, try to study, cinema. But I don't know. I think I'm too nerdy for that. The people in movies are so fancy. And, I'm not a fancy guy. I like technology, I like computers. And the student said, you want to make movies, but you like computers. Have you ever thought about games? And I was, oh, okay. He said, oh, there's this course that you can do. You can study game design. And I was, oh, that sounds nice. And I did it and I immediately fell in love. And then ever since, all these years, all the effort in my life was to make sure and make it possible to change my career. And here I am, I am doing exactly what I wanted and the way that I wanted to do it, which was to have my own company here in Brazil so I can have creative freedom. So it's pretty convoluted, but here I am.
That's really cool. How did the idea for Spacelines originate?
It is our first project as a studio, and it started when I was in college taking this game design course. Probably in America, it's probably similar, but when you're doing a university level course, when you're about to finish, you have a big project that you have to do. It's like your thesis, and in this course, the thesis, the final thing you had to do was a game. You had to make a game. But since it is a college level course, it had to have some sort of academic justification, some sort of research around it. So back then, my friends and I, we were playing a lot of co-op games. In 2017, there was Overcooked, Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time, a lot of really cool games. We were playing a lot of it. And then we pretty quickly finished Overcooked. And we were like, okay, I want to play more. So let's keep playing it. So we went back to the first level. And then we realized it wasn't really fun anymore because we knew how to beat it. And I'm not saying anything bad about Overcooked. I actually met Phil Duncan, the guy who created it. He's a genius and his game is amazing and he's a really cool guy. But we realized a thing that might elude people about Overcooked, which is it is a puzzle game. Because it's based on levels that the level designer had to create. So the puzzle is not very clear, but what it is you have to figure out the pipeline, the how to beat the thing, which is great. But when you figure it out, it's not really fun doing it again. So at the same time, Pedro is now my business partner, the other co-founder. A lot of the people in my team right now were the people that were together with us in college. Pedro and I, we really like roguelike games, playing like Faster Than Light, stuff like that. And we were thinking, man, is there a game that is like Overcooked? Like a party game, very funny, easy to hop in, hop out, but that doesn't really end. Like that is kind of, procedural. And we didn't really find any. And especially didn't find any that didn't involve combat. Like you could say Left 4 Dead is a sort of procedural co-op game because it has a lot of dynamic stuff. It's very replayable. But at the same time, you could say it's a little violent. There's a lot of gore. So we were thinking there's nothing like that. So that was the spark. That's going to be our final thesis. Can you make a game that is non-violent, couch co-op party game, easy controls, but that implements roguelike stuff like procedural levels, dynamic events? And there was a huge challenge. That was much more difficult than we could ever imagine. Not just the procedural stuff, but it's much harder to make procedural stuff that's non-violent than that's violent, So that was the start of the project, the origin, and the project that eventually became our first game.
After turning the project in college, what made you decide to make this your first official game with your studio?
As I said, I started this second college a little late in my life. I already had like a career. So when I started it, it was pretty clear to me that I was doing it very seriously. It wasn't like, oh, I have to go to college because that's what people do, So from the very beginning, I was like, I am here because by the end of this, whatever this is, I want to not be an English teacher anymore. Nothing against teaching English, but I didn't want to do it anymore. And I was lucky to find Pedro, who is much younger than me, but he's like this very mature guy. And this was his first college, but he had the same thing in mind. He was very serious about it. So every little project we did in college, we were like, this could be something for our company one day. From the very beginning, we knew like we're going to be indie developers and make our company. Everything we did was really cool. But when we started doing the final project, which became Spacelines, it exceeded our own expectations because it was really cool. It was really praised by the professors, and we were like, okay, that's the one. As soon as we concluded, we got our diplomas, we started everything necessary to make it into something real.
Pretty much every game has interesting ideas that were cut from the game for one reason or another. Were there any interesting ideas for Spacelines that you liked but just didn't make it into the final game?
Yeah, a lot of them. A lot of interesting ideas. But like some ideas, they were interesting but didn't make it into the final game because they were bad. So like sometimes an idea is interesting, but it's just not good. Now, other things we just didn't have time to do because, as you're probably aware, you interview a lot of developers. The biggest challenge is not having a good idea, is finishing it, right? So we were like, okay, we need to have a date. We need to have a deadline. We need to finish it. So eventually we cut stuff. Now, the reason that I might not give you too much detail about the cool stuff that we cut is that because Spacelines kind of exceeded our expectations in terms of its reception, we are currently developing the stuff that we didn't do for the first release. So we are going to release a bunch of stuff this year. We've already been releasing some patches, but like overall, I can tell you we're going to be doing a lot more upgrades. We're going to be doing new destinations, new events happening in the game, but I don't want to spoil them because they're going to be released. So the answer is yes, we cut a lot of stuff, but they're coming.
Managing your scope is a really important aspect of creating video games. How did you work to manage and maintain your scope while working on Spacelines?
This is a really good question. And this is a really hard question to answer. And I'm going to say one more thing. This is the most important thing for people who are trying to do what we did, which was make their own game. Because they're like, if you love games, like, oh, I want to work with games. I love games. There are two ways you can work with it, right? You can become a really good artist and join a really cool company. You can become a really good programmer, so like find a job in the area. But we wanted to have our own company, and that's a whole different story. And then if you're trying to make your own company, and you make your own project. From what I've been seeing, like there was a lot of other students trying to open their own business when we finished college, but like the 99% of them didn't make it. And the reason that from my understanding, that happened was problem with managing expectations. As you said, like the scope. The scope is too big, for example, like I want to make the next huge whatever. Or for example, they want to innovate in everything. We had a teacher back in college that he said, like, you should always try to innovate in 10% of what you're doing. Never innovate 100%. That's going to fail. That's just dumb. Especially if you're designing a project, which is not like it's not like I'm not painting some abstract art. This is a project for people to use. It's kind of like an app. So people try to innovate too much without being like concise. And the other expectation that the people don't really manage is the expectation about the reception of their project. Because what we've seen is that like people either quit too quickly or they persist too much in the wrong way. So if you have like a huge scope and you refuse to alter it so you can finish the project, I mean, it's nice that you love your project and that you're persistent, but that needs to be balanced. Like you have to also be open to change it. But at the same time, when you try to sell it to a publisher or to show it to the public or to an investor, you can't quit with the first time somebody says no. The thing about the scope is a part of a bigger thing about expectations. And just, people have to realize that it takes a long time, especially if it's your first project. Every single amazing game you've ever played, the person behind it made a shitty game before. You need to make a shitty game first. Or not necessarily shitty, but small, Like, how can you convince somebody that you can make a game if you haven't even shown like that you can reproduce Pac-Man? Oh, but I don't want to make a dumb kids game like Candy Crush. It's just simple. Candy Crush is not simple at all. It's very hard to make a game like that. It's huge. It's very polished, which is a thing people don't take into consideration. More than 50% of the time making game is polishing. We see that people get very like excited about, oh my God, this tool, like Unreal Engine 5. You can make a character jump and run in one day. Fine. But a game is not made of characters jumping and running. You need to know why your character is able to jump. You need to design it and test it and polish it.
How did you manage your scope while working on Spacelines and make sure that you're not trying to make a too big of a game while still making the game that you want to make?
I think the secret is that there is no conflict between I have to either choose to make a game that is reasonable scope or make the game that I want to make. What we did was we wanted to make a game with reasonable scope. We liked. This is very important. People need to like their project, So we love party games. So we knew we wanted to make a game of this size, and the scope was not small. It was big, but it was reasonable and doable. But that doesn't mean we didn't need to keep adjusting it. And the way we kept adjusting it was we were very glad that in college we had the opportunity to make a lot of smaller games. And since I've been working with Pedro from the day one in college, we really were able to kind of fine tune our understanding of how long things take. So it's good to have practice with smaller stuff, but also this involves constant planning and replanning. For example, a lot of indie people or people that are starting out, they don't really realize that there's so much work to be done outside of the game engine. Like, for example, you need to have somewhere a to-do list of what you need to do, and not just a to-do list. You need to have a slight idea, like, for example, I need to implement online multiplayer. That is one item in your to-do list that takes 7 months. Adjusting time, scheduling, etc. We're constantly adjusting, not being too attached to stuff. And from the beginning, already having a decently reasonable scope.
While working on the game, what was your process for playtesting, and what important information did you learn from playtesting?
Yeah, it's so important to test the game. Internally, we already have our weekly tests. We play the game. all the time. But when we are about to do a big feature, this is the cool stuff about the company being born in a large school. And we have a very good relationship with them. They're happy that a project that started there was released. So from time to time, we contact them and so we want to test a big feature in the game. Can we get a day like with the students, with the younger students? So I mean, not everybody can do this, but this is to say that it's important also to have a good volume of people testing the game. It's not a very easy thing to do. There's a lot of logistics, but there are ways like you can do on Steam or just, put your build in a flash drive, take it to a place with a lot of computers, make a nice form for people to give opinions. And this is interesting not because we're trying to only attest that our decisions are good and that the game is good, is because it's very important to have a basic understanding that when you are making something, you are much less prone to finding problems with it. And not because you are arrogant, it's because your mindset is like, I'm making this, I'm not reviewing it. That's why movie critics aren't usually movie makers, right? And this is not playtesting, but it's also really great. We finished college in 2017. 2018 and 2019, we spent like 2 years looking for a publisher or investors or partners. I must have pitched the game to literally hundreds of people, every company you can imagine. And they test the game. It's a part that we had a demo. Those were some of the most important play tests that we had. A very industry veteran guy telling us very clearly everything bad about the game. We didn't get like offended or sad. It was like, oh, great. Now this is an opportunity. This big shot gave us a lot of cool information for free, and do it 600 times. Eventually you're going to get it. Yeah, it's so important. Like, don't let your judgment be the final word in the quality of your game.
Is there anything that you wish you knew before you started working on the game?
I don't really think so, because like I told you, like we had a lot of patience and we managed our expectations. So we took our time, and everything that happened that was wrong wasn't something that we felt like we entered head first. Like I only quit my job when it was safe to do that. Like it really looked like it was going to work, and then I started doing this full time. We were not eager and like to do stuff fast, and like we did it in our own time, and it was a huge learning process. So I don't really have like a regret or something. Oh, that was a hugely bad decision, because we took our time.
Which parts of the game did you have to put the most time and effort into to get just the way you wanted it?
I think there's two. One is very subjective, and the other is very objective. So objectively, the most insanely difficult and time consuming and just very hard part was to make the game work online multiplayer. That was so hard. You open up a whole new world of like possible bugs and stuff like that. So to any developers thinking about doing that, like by all means do it. It's great, but reserve a lot of time to do that, because it's hard. Now, subjectively, part that took a really long time was to get the art direction just the way we wanted. Because sometimes you want something, but you don't really know how to describe it. Like, I wanted something like, you don't have the words. So the game has a very clear art direction about like, it's kind of Jetsons-esque. It's a kind of 1960s, late 50s, futuristic designs, Googie architecture, mid-century modern, all that good stuff. And all these words that I just told you back in 2017, when we were still in college, I would have described that as like, kind of retro, kind of like Futurama. So there was a lot of studying to first get the words right, and then try to translate that look and try to make all the things in the game have the same look. Try to translate that into like actual 3D art. And we were really happy like that we have great artists in the team, Pedro included, Talita, Avila. And I guess the key thing was that early on we got an art director called Sergio, and he really helped us like understand this. So that was really time consuming, but it was worth the wait.
What do you feel is the most difficult part of making games?
Making games, just like I want to make a game for myself. I think the most difficult part is probably organizing your work in terms of like not getting crazy. It's a ridiculously complicated thing to make a game. It's so complicated. There's so many things involved. It's basically like making a movie, but also at the same time making an app. You know, like it's a movie that can glitch out. It's hard. People get really overwhelmed about this the amount of stuff, or they get frustrated when they've been doing something for a long time and they're still not finished. So people should take a lot of time to organize and know exactly what they need to do. Because the rest, I mean, is it hard to program? Yes, programming is difficult, but you can learn that, you know? Is it difficult to do beautiful artwork? Yes, but you can get a nice artist, or, you know, there are some amazing games that are like just, you know, dots and lines. So really, I think the most difficult part about actually making the game is organizing the project, making sure you're not lost, you know what you're supposed to be doing, you're not overwhelmed. Now, I guess in a broader sense, like the most difficult part about what we did, which was like started a company, release a game, to make that your job, people should know that there's a lot of work involved in the actual business stuff, you know? Like I can't just come to like Xbox and say, hey, my name is Fabio, I'm making a game, give me money. I can't do that. You need to have a company. You need to have like a website. Like you need to show some semblance of reliability. Most people that want to work with games don't really care about that or don't know anything about that, and that's fine. There are people that do know about that. Like so, I've always had like a mentors. I always talk to other people, like other developers here in Brazil. I bug them, asking like, how can I do this stuff? And you need to make an ecosystem that enables you to work with this in a structured way. And for the love of God, don't jump into it too quickly. Like so many startups go bankrupt because they're too eager. You know, like just take your time.
What was the biggest lesson that you learned from working on Spacelines?
The biggest lesson was that it's possible. I'm saying that because I'm trying to put myself in my own shoes when I was like 18, and I was like, I always liked this stuff. Like I always like seeing behind the scenes stuff in movies or games, like a creative industry. And it's such a cool thing to do. And you're like, man, how do they do it? How do they get to do that? Like in a broader sense, like how can you have a job that is just fun? This is kind of a cliche, but a job that doesn't feel like a job, you know? And that sometimes may sound like completely impossible, but the biggest lesson was that it is possible. Here I am. It's been really, really great working with this.
What's next for you? What are you working on now?
So right now we're working on new content for Spacelines that we're going to be releasing throughout the year. We are currently also considering porting the game to other platforms. Currently, the game is on Steam, works on PC, Mac, Linux, and also it's on Xbox, Microsoft Store. It's on Game Pass also, which is cool. But we're considering like other platforms that might be interesting. So that's a possibility for this year. And, this has been our first game. Really cool. So maybe we're going to start a new one this year. Pretty sure we will. I have no idea what it's going to be, but I'm sure it's going to be fun.
It's awesome. Thank you so much for your time. It's been great interviewing you.
Oh, this has been great. Thank you so much, Miles.
And that was the interview. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like this content and want to hear more, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast. Also, if you have a friend who you think might like the show, make sure to share it with them. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok at Game Design Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time.